Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to welcome you all to this important session in the Risk Leaders Initiative. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank Dr. Schneider for joining us today. Dr. Gav is a world-renowned expert in risk management, leadership, and resilience. His innovative approach, particularly his development of the Presilience framework, has transformed how leaders and organizations prepare for and manage challenges. As someone who spent several years navigating the complexities of risk and leadership, I truly understand how crucial it is to not just react to risks, but to build systems that prepare us for uncertainty that can help us to thrive. Leadership today requires more than traditional approaches. It requires risk intelligence. This means having the ability to identify, understand and respond to risks with clarity and confidence. In today's session, we will also explore the fascinating connection between risk and organizational culture, a topic that I find particularly important. An organization's culture sets the foundation for resilience, and without it, even the best strategies can fall short. Gav will guide us through how to align culture with risk management to create lasting success. We will also take a closer look at the psychology of risk, how our minds perceive and respond to uncertainty, and how this impacts decision making at all the levels of leadership in the organization. Lastly, Gav will introduce us to the compliance, resilience, and the Presilience triangle, a framework that shifts the focus from reacting to problems to building a proactive and resilient mindset. This session is a chance for all of us to reflect on our leadership approach, learn new strategies, and gain insights that will strengthen our ability to lead in today's unpredictable world. Gab, thank you again for being with us today. I'm confident that everyone will be inspired and equipped with tools to lead with greater resilience and impact. So before I hand it over to you, Gav, the members of the initiative would like to thank you, and they nominate one of them, Arij, and after her, the floor is yours, okay? So it will be a quick minute, okay? Arij, is now your turn.
Okay. Good morning, folks. My name is Arij. I am a governance specialist. On behalf of myself and the group of the Risk Leaders Initiative, I would like to express our deepest gratitude to you, Dr. Schneider, for taking the time to deliver this exceptional lecture titled Leadership and High Performance, a Risk and Resilience View. To be honest, the moment we know that Gav will be the expert for this session, the entire group was filled with excitement and anticipation. It is truly a privilege to learn from a source of knowledge and experience like you. Your insights and expertise in this critical field inspire us, and we are confident that the lesson you've shared today will profoundly shape not only our individual journeys, but also our contributions at an organizational level. Thank you for your time, your thoughtful effort, and your generosity in sharing your knowledge. We are honored to have this opportunity, and we look forward to applying what we've learned to drive meaningful change in our lives and our careers. Thank you.
Thank you, Fayad. Thank you, Arij. And you've set the bar very high. I only have 1 hour with you, but I will do
It's
my
all
best.
right. It's all right.
Okay. If you're ready, Fayad, I'm happy to start.
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. So, well and truly, thank you for the opportunity to have a chat to you. Thank you, Fayad, for the invitation. I'm thrilled to be able to speak to you. And once it was explained to me the way this program is working and the generosity in the way this program has been put together, kudos to the organizers. It's an honor to be involved because it's people trying to make things better, not just do the same thing over and over again, which makes me happy right down to my core. Thank you. Okay, let's go. All right, so as mentioned in the intro, I've done a lot of things, been to a lot of places, started running my first business back in South Africa nearly 25 years ago. That was a specialized security risk business that grew into a risk solutions business when we incorporated in Australia almost 15 years ago, actually a bit more, to the end of 2007. We started off originally as a security risk business, but very quickly found the operating environment was so different. And compliance as the driver, as opposed to solutions as the driver, seemed to be the operating methodology in Australia. So that forced us to change, and change in many different ways, and was actually the birth of Risk to Solution Group, the business that I run. But more than that, it was a way to look at the way we tackle risk differently. So I want you to just imagine for a second. At that point, I'd worked probably in about 16 countries in Africa, the UK, the US. We had a business in India, and I had quite a bit of experience in Southeast Asia and a bit of experience in the Middle East, but I wouldn't say I was an expert by any way, shape, or form. But I'd seen many different cultures, and I'd seen many different ways of doing things. So, for example, from an African context, and even from an Asian perspective, it was a lot more trust-based. Once people kind of acknowledged me as an expert, they would tend to listen to my opinion. And I could quite quickly help develop solutions. Fast forward to the kind of compliance-driven, I use the acronym CYA, you can figure out what the A stands for, but that seems to be the methodology around most highly developed markets, is there's a perception that we can regulate risk as opposed to manage risk and take risk and learn from risk. And it was a fascinating experience because we found that, in fact, one of the first people that helped me here, this is about 16 years ago, I wrote my first risk report after doing an assessment here. And he looked at me and he went, that's not going to pass the thump test. So when you put it down on the table, does it go thump? Is it thick enough that it will actually make a noise? And I looked at him very puzzled as to what should the thickness of the document have to do with the quality of the outputs? But that should have nothing to do with the other. And it was a very good lesson around compliance-based thinking versus resilience or presilience-based thinking. So a couple of things to start off with. Firstly, if I had the answers to all of our problems, we'd be having this conversation on my yacht. It would be a very different conversation. Nobody globally has all the answers for us. What we do know is that having the right tools available can make a big difference. So I like to think of the solutions package as a toolbox, not necessarily a binding standard or a rigid approach. And it's up to the practitioner to take the right tool at the right time to get the right outcome. What does that mean? The model itself or the standard you pick is not as important as the outcome. We're judged and we're only as good as the last job we did. And it's not good enough in our fast-paced operating world to be able to go, well, it follows ISO 31000 or it's COSO aligned or, whatever compliance mechanism we use is not enough if we don't get the results done. And we'll circle back to that a few times. You can't have any discussion about human-based risk without the concept of biases coming into play and managing cognitive biases. So I'd urge you, as we go through this, run your own bias check. What I mean by that is twofold. If I say something that you love, that's a bias. Now, it might be a positively framed bias, but nonetheless, it might not be a well thought out risk-based, evidence-based decision. You might just really like it. Conversely, you might not like it and you might have a negative bias. That's also okay, right? If I put something across to you and you don't like it, you don't have to use it. That's okay. It might not be a tool you want in your toolbox. What I would urge you to think about, though, is at least ask yourself the question of why don't I like it or why do I like it so much? Because that's how we start to manage our own biases. Next, I want you to think networks and intersections, not just linear approaches. So one of the things that has changed dramatically since the internet age is our hyperconnectivity, information sharing, and network methodology. What do we mean by that? In the old days, pre the internet, when we had to give command and control instructions, I told the person below me who told the person below them, and so chain of command was followed, and the same thing happened upwards. Practically for us now, it doesn't happen that way. Somebody low down the food chain could send an email to everyone in one go, and all of a sudden we've got different ways of communicating. We also know, and this is one thing I do love very much about doing business in the Middle East, it's very relationship based. And trust is very much based on who do you know, who have you built that time with, how have you put effort into building a relationship. I think that is a significant pro because it enables fast decision making because we've already addressed the trust issue. It takes longer, but there are significant advantages to that. So I don't want you to just think networks in terms of the exact place you work. I want you to think networks in terms of an ecosystem of people and organizations out there that can help you get better outcomes and move forward. Next point, it is evolutionary and adaptive. This will change. It has changed since we launched it in 2017. It changes every year. We do a formal review, update, and tweak things. So I can guarantee you, particularly with the generative AI taking hold the way it is, that next year we'll have to change again. And it is a continuous and ongoing process. Instead of feeling frustrated by the fact that this stuff changes, be grateful because it means we're moving with what's happening around us. We're not static, so we're growing. Good opportunity. Next point, when we talk risk, and it doesn't really matter which definition you pick, they all, as Fayadh mentioned in his introduction, they all talk about managing uncertainty. And we actually wouldn't be in this game if we were certain. When you're certain, there's no risk, right? It's definitely going to happen. The less we have certainty, the more risk skills and risk management skills become critical. So the reality is we have to apply science, but equally there is a bit of guesswork in what we do because nobody can predict the future with 100% certainty. So I'd like you to think of both domains. I want you to develop the very best scientific methodology, but also I want you to train the very best intuitive decision-making and forecasting capability. It's a two-tiered thing. We often use the term swag. Okay? So if you could take a swag, that most of the time when you're making a risk-based judgment or providing a risk assessment, it is a swag. You're using as much science as you can, as much data as you can, but you're predicting the likelihood or the consequence of something. Sometimes we predict it with a lot of certainty, other times not. So start to feel comfortable with that. Don't let it frustrate you. There's many stories on that. I once had a really robust debate with an engineer about risk and certainty. And the engineer's position was, I have no appetite at all for risk. When I design something, it must have zero likelihood of failure. I was listening to this guy who was an expert, and I gave him a lot of respect. I'm just trying to understand how he could get to that position. And eventually, I went back, did some homework after a robust argument and discussion, and came back to him and showed him the specifications for the concrete piping he was recommending in the build of his oil and gas pipeline. And they had something like a 0.27% failure rate. And so we're going, okay, it's not 100%. You feel it's 100% because the failure rate is so low. But that's not an absolute. There's still risk there. And if we don't have proactive maintenance, and if we don't have an understanding of what makes these things fail, every year that 0.027% will add up and add up and add up. And eventually you'll be sitting in a vulnerable position. So we need to move away from this idea that we have absolutes when we don't. And when you do, it makes life easier. Enjoy it. It's pretty rare. And then the last thing is my methodology and what I'm going to share with you now should not replace systems, standards, and methods that we've proven to work. I want you to think of what I'm providing as the oil and the glue. The oil that lubricates the system to make it work and the glue that holds it together. And those are two pieces that are often ignored once we have a framework built. Again, I will pause at the end for questions if we have time, but feel free, connect with me on LinkedIn. You can drop me questions post this. There's plenty of time for dialogue, and we are very early globally in our journey to Presilience. Okay, so don't worry, you're not getting in late. There's plenty of time to do things better. So the core question then is why? Why bother? If risk was a mature function, which in many cases it is, we have a set of functions that a department does. We have vocations that we could call risk vocations. Equally, we have a lot of work to do. I was gobsmacked maybe 4 months ago. I was asked to give a talk at a high school. And I spoke to maybe 150 senior children who were about to go into university. I must have done an okay job because one of them came to me afterwards and said, I like what you do. How do I do it? And this is the hard part. I didn't have a pathway for her to go, well, if you go to university and you study this course, after that course, you can get an internship, which will teach you the following skills. Then you can learn the following stuff in doing a master's degree, and that will have you qualified as a global risk expert and you get a job anywhere. We don't really have that yet. So it's very interesting that we are still in a developmental phase of the risk vocation, and we've got a lot of work to do. So why now? Why you? Why us? Why risk? This term VUCAD, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and digital. VUCA was the original term that was coined in the late 1980s. I feel we are not looking at the world we're in now unless we have that digital overlay, because almost everything we do, just look at how we're talking. I'm in Brisbane, Australia. You're all over Saudi, and we're all together at the same time. So if we're not thinking digital, we are missing an entire domain. So volatility is not new. Things move quickly and have moved quickly from time to time. The challenge we've got now is being hyper-connected means the impact of things moving quickly can be a challenge. So I'll ask you a question. Think back to COVID. It wasn't so long ago. Right? The lethality, so we're risk people, right? We can have a bit of fun. The lethality of COVID was not nearly as bad as Ebola or many of the other diseases that had already been around and were potentially pandemic causing. What changed the game there was the volatility. It spread so quickly and was so easily spread. Okay, so volatility absolutely changes the game. And just think about this. If you were sitting there right now at home and your power and internet went out, what is your ability to do your job? It's changed, right? So in the old days, if you were manually doing something, you were at a place and you were at that place with a set of instructions to do a small job. These days, there are many more moving pieces. It makes it a bit tougher. The next challenge is uncertainty. And we'll just use generative AI as the example for that. But nobody knows where this will stop. And nobody knows how evolved these pieces will get to. So part of the challenge now is humans have been bombarded with change in the last 30 years at a level that we're not used to. Just think about this. In the last 30 years, we've had digital mobile networks and cell phone networks that have enabled us to talk to each other anywhere in the world comparatively cheaply. We've gone from analog to digital. We've got the internet. We now got generative AI. And that's all in the space of 20 or 30 years. So our entire way of working and the way the world functions has changed. We've moved from simple and complicated operating paradigms into a world where complexity is the default. And chaos and complexity require a different set of skills to managing simple and complicated systems, which I won't go into today. But if you're a student of risk or a risk practitioner and you're not looking at systems or complex adaptive systems theory, you're not helping yourself. If you can understand a system, you can manage the risk of that system better. And it's a really important piece when we scale our solutions and try to get them to work in different contexts, different environments for different types of operations. Ambiguity, never been harder. Never been harder. We have so many ways of communicating with each other now. Internet, email, messenger apps, social media, the list just goes on and on and on. Yet we suck at communication. We've gotten worse at it, even though we have so many ways to do it. Why? 3 things, I think. Misinformation, disinformation, and information overload. It's interesting. During COVID, I did a whole bunch of keynote sessions for the Global Business Continuity Institute. And the BCI, if any of your members, for me, I believe they are almost the custodian of business resilience. Like they set the methodology for how you do a business interruption assessment, how you develop a business continuity plan, etc. And they were so confused. My brief was, our members don't know what to do in terms of resilience. We don't know how to put solutions together, etc. So as we run through the session today, please in the back of your head, keep thinking, this is the operating world we're in. Volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and digital. To thrive requires what we refer to as ambidextrous capability. Ambidextrous, I need to be able to do two things. I need to be able to operate two sides. You need to be really good at leadership, and you need to be really good at management. You need to be really good at process-based decision-making, but you also need to get really good at intuitive-based decision-making. You need to get very good at building systems and frameworks that people can follow instructions to reduce risk and maintain compliance. But equally, we can't stifle innovation and creativity so that our people feel engaged and want to manage risk. Because if you stop and ask yourself a question, and I'm going to do this quickly for you now, how many of you, and I know the chat box, I think it's shut down, you can't apply that now, but just think for yourself. How many of you have the title risk manager, but actually don't manage any risk? Think about it, because to manage a risk, you have to own a risk, right? Or at the very least, you have to be given the accountability and responsibility to tackle that risk challenge. So more and more, we're realizing that risk management departments are actually not risk management departments. They're risk advisory and they're risk coaching and they're risk leadership departments. But the people on the ground who own those assets, own those operations, are the ones that have to do the risk management day by day. So this is a team sport. It's not a specialist sport that is only done by the expert. And we need to change our thinking a little bit. Otherwise, we are going to struggle in a world where generative AI will be able to answer a lot of the risk-based questions when people have to make decisions, which is coming very fast. Okay, so a little activity for you, and you can't really provide me the feedback now, but I'd like you to think about the first two words that jump into your head when you hear the word risk. Don't worry, I know you can't give me feedback at the moment, but please do the exercise. So often, when I speak to risk audiences and I ask that question, I'll get likelihood, consequence, probability, impact, all the risk jargon that we get used to. That's great for experts. The challenge we've got is that very few people other than risk experts speak our language. So when you go and try to talk to other parts of your business or other parts of our ecosystem, often they don't know what we're talking about. And it's so basic for us, but it's often confusing for them. Same with resilience. If you put that word down and you look at the technical definitions of resilience, most of them have to do with the idea of toughness. You know, the ability for a person or a system to overcome a disruption and keep going, or to bounce back from something that was unexpected. One of the things, it's interesting, and I wish it on you, the audience attending this, if you develop something new, you don't only get love and attention, you also get a bit of hate. Okay? And some of the first people that pushed back when I introduced this idea of presilience were from the world of resilience. And the pushback was along the lines of, we agree, Gav, that presilience is a good idea, but shouldn't it just all be part of organizational resilience? And my response is, if that works for you, great. If it doesn't work for you, then all you're doing is carrying on perpetuating a system that doesn't work very well. So you need to look at the efficacy and the outcome. The last part is leadership. And even if you are the lowest member of a risk team and you're just starting your career, we all are required to lead in different ways in the modern world. And we need to change this view of leadership from moving away from this idea that you are the person with the big office and the big salary and the big title and the big name, and look at what you can do for each other, for your business, and for yourself all the time. And that sort of accountability and ownership creates high performance, creates good outcomes. So it does start with you, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But realistically, what we've done is we've integrated risk, leadership, resilience, and high performance as a package, because we found that you cannot thrive in a VUCAD world when these are treated separately. So that's the fundamental piece. I'm sure all of you are familiar with all the terms on this page. I hope you are. But it is interesting because language is tricky. And almost always when we do consulting gigs or capability uplift gigs, I'm starting right back at basics. And I'm asking the audience, and you can do this. Feel free to do this in your own business. Have a little conversation about the difference between a risk, an incident, an issue, an emergency, a disruption, and a crisis. They're just the top few ones. And I guarantee you, you will be quite frustrated and sometimes entertained by the broad range of answers you get. So for us, it's not important to make sure everybody knows the technically correct definition. What is important is for us to make sure our stakeholders know when one starts and one ends, and what generically classifies one. So as an example, risk is based on uncertainty. If it's happened already, it's not a risk anymore. We might have a residual risk, we might have a secondary risk, or we might have a new risk. Okay? But realistically, once it's happened, it's now an incident, okay, which could also be an emergency, a disruption, and a crisis. So again, we throw a lot of these terms around, but also I'm fascinated too, cross-culturally, different cultures view these things differently and have different takes on them. So it is important to remember that if we're talking about incident management, we're talking about something that's actually happened. But it's critically important for risk management, because if something's happened, we know which of our risks are getting realized, which provides us active feedback for the way we run risk management. So one of my big frustrations with this stuff is, if you are in the world of risk, you are the connector, you are the glue, you are the oil, you are the one who has to glue people together, because they won't understand this. Do you think somebody sitting in marketing really understands the difference between when something is just a disruption or when something's an emergency? They're probably not, unless you've done a great job training them or educating them. Very difficult to do. The difference between an emergency and a crisis, amazing. Like, we do a lot of work on the crisis management side of things too. And one of the things that constantly amazes me is how many organizations don't understand what their crisis management team is there for and when to use them. And they'll deploy these people on incidents, issues, or emergencies where they're not needed. Because if you've set things up right, an emergency should be manageable. It should be certain. We can predict it happening. We can predict its consequences. We can predict our response, and we can manage those variables. The only difference between an emergency and a crisis comes down to one word. It becomes overwhelming. Once it's overwhelming, right, then we need crisis capability, because nobody has the solution anymore. It's changed. As you shift down, people often talk about, what do we want to get out of risk management? So for me, I come back to, what do we want to get out of making great decisions? Not just having risk management as the, the sign on the door and the tick in the org structure to say we've got the function. And I'll quote one of my friends, who is the CEO of the Risk Management Institute of Australasia, made a comment. He's like, I really wish we could get to the point that risk management was stop being viewed as the handbrake to happiness, and can people view us as the enabler? Because almost all risk managers want stuff to happen. We just want people to manage negative outcomes and achieve positive outcomes. So it requires a bit of thought and a bit of application of controls. To do that, we have to talk their language. We can't force them to talk ours. So spending a bit of time aligning these things is really useful. Let's look at the next piece. And I only have an hour with you. Otherwise, I would spend a lot longer on a lot of these things. For some of you who might have done psychology during your university time, or come across the late Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Okay, the idea with the hierarchy of needs was originally that we need to fulfill the bottom level needs before we can get to the top level needs. In the modern world, it's a bit different, because things happen so quickly and intersect. One of the things I found fascinating, spending, let's say, the first decade or two of my career in most places you would never want to go on holiday. Yeah, I worked in Equatorial Guinea and Senegal and Angola and Mozambique, etc., etc. Not nice places. You look at a lot of people there they haven't fulfilled the needs on the bottom of the hierarchy, but many of them are very happy. They love who they are. They love what they do. They love their families. So they've been able to tick off the top, but not the bottom. You look at most first world and developed countries, a lot of times people are going, the government must take care of me. Someone else must provide me safety. Someone else must provide me security. And they waive their responsibility to be able to do it. If you're in the field of risk management, and I want you to think about this very carefully, this has blown my mind as I've worked through my career, because I've been able to play in most sectors. I won't say I've worked in every sector, but I've done state government, federal government, local government, mining, oil and gas, not-for-profit, for-profit businesses, banking, telecoms. I've worked in lots of different sectors. And one of the things that consistently amazes me is this idea that we as the corporate don't have to actually address the needs of our staff. Our staff are there for us, and vice versa, where the staff are going, the corporate must take care of me. Oh, why should I do that? So in reality, I want you to think of the Maslow's hierarchy more like a puzzle, and going, if we want high performance, we have to make sure that the basic needs of our people and ourselves are met. So if I'm trying to get high performance out of you, but you don't feel safe, you're not going to perform very well. If I'm trying to get you to be innovative and you don't believe in yourself, you have no self-esteem, you are not going to come up with new and innovative ways of doing things. So we can take a lot of these old tools and we can clean them up, dress them up, and make them work for us again. We don't only have to invent new stuff. My last book, Can I See Your Hands, which was more centered on personal safety. And there's a lot of history to that. But I introduced this idea of something I call the whole of person model. I want you to think about yourself: work life, personal life, and virtual life. Imagine you are the world's best decision maker. Maybe some of you are. Maybe you're employed because you are that good at helping organizations make great decisions. What is the point of doing an incredible job for your organization but making terrible decisions for yourself? Right? We need to be able to make good decisions at work, at home, and online. And it's the skill set we need to build that is cross-domain. So I urge you, let's stop thinking in the 1980s mindset of, no, what job do I need the employee to do? And those are the only skills we will give them. And go, hold on a second, high-performing workers in the modern world have the ability to do certain things. They have the ability to change jobs. They have the ability to learn. They have the ability to critically think. They have the ability to make decisions. They have the ability to communicate and share knowledge. They have the ability to be aware and identify things that could help them or hurt them. And if we focus on these core skills, which I'll circle back to later, we don't want those core skills to only be something that makes them, the best family person and makes their family love them. You'd want them to go, your family loves you, you're great at work. We love you. So when we look at building these skills, don't only think of them one-dimensionally for the workplace. If we get good at them, they will make you better at everything. How does it start? It starts with the idea of risk intelligence. So I coined this definition 8-9 years ago now, and it's interesting. There are many other definitions out there. A lot of them tended to hinge on the idea of big data analysis. And so if we analyze our data, we can get trends and understanding, which will enable us to make better decisions. So that's intelligence. I like to think of it a little more like emotional intelligence. So realistically, you can't be risk intelligent unless you use it. So it is an applied attribute, right? You can't theoretically go, I make great decisions in theory, but in practice, I always get it wrong. So this has to be something we use. Next, it's a living skill. It changes. It keeps adapting. As you learn more, so should your risk intelligence adapt and change. What should it do? It should enable better decision-making that proactively enables you to embrace opportunity and manage downside. So realistically, if we want to get good at risk intelligence, we have to have a basic underpinning of agility. Why? Because sometimes the environment around us changes and what's required of us changes. If we're too fixed and too rigid, we can't thrive in VUCAD. We can only survive. The challenge we've got is humans are wired for homeostasis. We are wired for stability. We want to pretend things are stable even when they're not. It's often why I talk about this idea of risk theater. And I've seen this over and over again. Organizations, governments will put in place things that make it seem like they're solving a problem because they feel better, but it actually hasn't really solved the problem at all. It just makes us think we've done it. A good example of this was in late 2017, after we had seen some attacks where terrorists were driving vehicles into crowds. Everybody wanted to buy bollards. And I sat in a meeting once with the head of a $1 billion business. It was the second largest city council in Australia, who said to me, bollards stop terrorists, that's all we want to do. I still remember thinking to myself, going, hold on a second, like, you don't need a degree in criminology to realize that terrorists will pick the way of committing an attack that will give them the best return on investment, same as all of us. So if you've put up bollards, all they're going to do is find a slightly different way to attack you or to pick a vulnerable area to exploit. So bollards don't stop terrorists. Bollards stop a certain type of terrorist attack. And we need to get the language right. Otherwise, we get stuck in theater because you get high-level executives who are then going, it's all sorted. Another common corporate one, and maybe some of you experienced this one, don't worry, the risk register is up to date. We did a risk review and a coaching activity with a decent-sized local government organization, and their risk manager, credit to this young lady, but she presented us a risk register spreadsheet that had 800-something plus risks on it. And she had meticulously spent 2 years refining it. To which we had to ask the question, how many of those risks are you managing? And she went, oh, we're swamped. We're really not getting to many. Okay, so all you've done is catalogued everything that could cause you pain instead of actually looking at the critical things that would help you not get hurt or succeed. So it's a good lesson in a concept I like to refer to as critical risk management. In a world that is busier and busier and busier, simply cataloging everything that could go wrong or right just creates a long list. And it can frustrate you tremendously because you can never finish that list. By the time you get a few risks sorted, new ones have come or things have changed. Get your critical risk management sorted first. Then you can start looking at your resilience, your next few pieces. There's a big piece to that. So that comes to the next piece of the risk intelligence idea. It's great to be agile, but equally, doing the right thing sometimes is hard. And making tough decisions is hard. You have to have the resilience to be able to weather the implementation of a tough decision or a change. It's not always easy. Equally, one of the best skills we can have is to update our perspective as new information comes in. So if new information is coming in, you may have to change your mind, which might mean a whole lot of work again. So it's not just a pivot with agility, it's actually starting again and doing the job again. Yeah, but that is what risk intelligence requires if we want to be good at it. The idea is to actually start to shift from high reliability, which is the first goal, to high performance. And we want two things. You want sustained high performance during business as usual, and you want the ability to thrive through disruption, not just survive. You want to get your organization to the point that it's not just reliable, because if you're reliable, you can get disrupted. You want to be high performing. We then built the risk intelligence checklist or toolbox, which we then cross-mapped at 3 levels: self, others, and organization. We don't have time in an hour session for you to run this, but it is worth thinking about, even just from a personal perspective, that if you look at those criteria, those 10 criteria, and you scored them out of 10, and you scored yourself around how well do you manage uncertainty, how well do you achieve objectives, how well do you have the ability to move, think, and understand quickly and easily, etc. You start getting a measure of your own risk intelligence. And I would strongly encourage you that step 1, if you want to be considered a risk leader, an influencer, people whose opinion matters, you need to have confidence in the way you make decisions, in the way your own risk intelligence applies. Once you're good at that, you can then train your team, develop your team, and arguably, you want to then get the organization performing at that level. So if it's a group of individuals who are risk intelligent, working in high-performing teams or high-performing divisions with a culture of risk intelligence, we should be learning, we should be adapting, and we should be making great decisions. We should be cohesive and we should be aligned. We should be sharing rewards and benefits, and we should be creating exactly what I'd said before, the ability to have sustainable high performance in business as usual and thrive through disruption. If that was easy, legitimately, I would just go, just tick the checklist off and let's move on, because you've got your risk intelligence sorted. Each one of these attributes is a lot of work to develop and hone. But when you've done it, you know that personally, you have the ability to make great decisions for yourself. It's an incredibly useful way to invest your time and effort. So I want to give you a few tools as well. I don't just want to talk to you about the theory. Dr. Matthew Lieberman, neuroscientist, came up with this idea of what he calls the neural seesaw. This was based on a lot of research. He wrote about it in his book, Social. But realistically, what he found is that our neural chemistry can't do two things at the same time. So when we are highly analytical, it's using a certain part of our neural chemistry. And when we transition from analytical to emotive, or vice versa, it uses the same neural chemistry. So it's much like multitasking. Nobody can actually multitask. The people who are good at multitasking have just developed the ability to switch very quickly between tasks. The people who are incredible leaders are the people who've learned to be able to switch between analytical and factual thinking and emotive and empathetic thinking, and know that there's a seesaw. You can train and develop this, but we've expanded this a bit bigger. We actually have identified one of the big challenges we've got today is that, and you can look at the research, you don't have to take my word for it, but if you look, and I think Harvard did relatively good research looking at how few strategic plans are ever implemented. And it's something like 80 to 90% of strategic plans are never implemented. look at the effort you put into building a strategic plan and setting objectives, and then you don't implement it. Okay, what a waste of effort and resources. Part of the challenge is you get people who are focusing on the top of the organization and forget what the middle and bottom look like. Okay, so they are focusing so much on the strategy, they forget about the tactics and the operational capability to execute. Equally, we know the best innovation comes from the front line. It comes from the people that have to do this stuff all the time. So we need them to be able to feed information up too. So the term we like to use is a term we've coined, we call it stactical, which is a combination of strategic and tactical, or tactical and strategic. Google was actually our first client who bought that product from us. And realistically, that's the start of Presilience. It's two-tiered thinking. If I can think about what have I got to do to achieve the corporate or strategic objective, and the people setting the corporate or strategic objective understand what I can do and what I want to do and how I want to do it, we get alignment. When we get alignment, we get high performance. Okay, so this is not just tick a risk and compliance box. We want high performance. We want outcomes. We want outputs. We need to be able to manage cognitive bias, as we discussed before. We also need to manage cognitive dissonance. Dissonance is pretty tough too. So dissonance is often defined as a feeling of dis-ease, not disease where we're sick, dis-ease. We feel uncomfortable. Yeah, it's what happens when we are confronted with information or facts that are contradictory to a belief we hold. It's hysterical. I don't know if you've ever had a discussion with somebody about politics or religion. They never go well. And if you're winning, okay, what tends to happen, this person gets louder, more aggravated, and more aggressive, and sometimes personal, because you've triggered their cognitive dissonance now. You've confronted something they believe in with facts that are contrary to what they believe in, and it makes them feel horrible. So they start personally attacking you or your sources. So when we understand how a lot of this stuff works, we can start to play a much more strategic game. There's a small part of the brain called the reticular activating system, the RAS. It's the filter. It filters everything we see, hear, taste, touch, or come across, and it filters it on only two variables. What could help me? So what am I interested in? Or what could hurt me? No wonder risk language is so negative, because negative tends to trump positive. If you think of most organizations, bad news travels very quickly, good news travels slowly. Bad news hits that rumor mill very fast and gets twisted and convoluted. Good news is hard. By understanding a little bit of neuroscience, we can get some really good outcomes in our risk management programming. We can also get some really good outcomes for our team and our organization. If you're not familiar with the late Dr. Daniel Kahneman's theory of System 1 and System 2 thinking, if this is the first time you're being introduced to it, I'd like you to think a bit more about it. I'm hoping this is not the first time for many of you, and many of you have thought about these two domains. So practically put, this is a model to understand the mind. It is not that somebody dissected a brain and found, System 1 and System 2 in there. That's not how it works. Right? But the idea is System 1 is our intuitive, fast response. We make the vast majority of our decisions with System 1. Otherwise, we would get information overload continuously. And most of these happen automatically. Think about how many thousands of decisions you make every day. From the second you open your eyes, you're deciding how you roll out of bed. You're deciding how you get out of bed. You're deciding what you wear. You're deciding what you eat. You're deciding how you stand. The vast majority of these happen without us thinking. Where most corporate risk management sits today is in System 2. It's very process-based. It's often long and cumbersome and has many steps in it, but it's logical. Right? We have a logical system or flow, whether it's COSO, ISO, or any other risk standard or guideline you apply. The problem is it takes a lot of effort. And because it takes a lot of effort, it can be slow and frustrating. So what we want to do, and I often get asked this, I've been teaching psychology of risk and decision making for almost a decade. And I have a lot of people that come to me and go, Gav, we don't want to do a one-year course or whatever. Just tell us how we get good at this stuff now. And my answer is normally something like this. You've got to put a ton of effort into growing the most effective System 1 you can. And then you've got to have the wisdom to know when to switch on System 2. Right? So think about the way you've built your corporate risk or organizational risk frameworks. If it's an enterprise risk management framework, wonderful. You've got the idea that this is a big picture and you want to be able to compare different pieces. But practically, your ERM framework is a System 2 framework. It is designed based on logic, process, and it takes effort and thought. 95% of decisions are made with system one and we do nothing about it. So think about the efficacy of you in your organization. If you want to get high outputs, you have to train system one, develop system one, and build system one into your organization, into yourself, and into your team. That's not easy. It's much easier to use system two because we can document processes, we can buy software, we can put compliance requirements in place. The question I'd ask you is it doing the job as well as it could? Is it getting you the outcome you want? If it's not, I would say step one, do a bit of bias management. And if you've done your bias management and you're comfortable that your ERM system is totally solving every problem that your organization is facing, please phone me. I would like to write a case study on what you're doing because it's incredibly rare. And I would probably say that it's more, that's the way you perceive it, then that's the way it's actually happening. High-performing risk culture is a combination of both. Great system two and great system one. And it's a combination of risk intelligent people and risk intelligent teams creating a risk intelligent outcome for your culture. So since we started the Presilience thing, we've had some pretty good feedback on it. Overall, we're definitely winning more than we're losing, and we're getting some good buy-in. What it really means, though, and we were by far the smallest company to make, it's a very prestigious awards list in Australia. We made the most innovative companies list for our work in this space. But I want you to think about what I'm going to share with you now, almost like a three-legged stool. If one of those legs is broken, it falls down. It doesn't do the job it's supposed to do. If one of the legs is broken, out of compliance, resilience, and presilience, you cannot get sustained high performance during business as usual, and it's unlikely you will thrive through disruption. You might make it through. You might limp through. You might get beaten so badly, but still be able to carry on. That's not the output we want. We want everything to be high performing and learning. We are not naive, right? Lots of bad things happen and lots of things happen out of our control, but equally so do good things. Remember the ISO definition of risk. Risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. Love it or hate it, that definition provides us a framework to understand. So if you think about risk appetite and tolerance, if you work in an organization that truly believes compliance and rule setting is the way to high performance, you're going to have a hard time because all the research into human performance says the opposite. It says people who are engaged and care and feel valued and are allowed space for creativity tend to work harder and innovate better. But we do live in this really weird world that has lots of rules and stuff we have to do, and other things we have to be adaptive and innovative. So I look at compliance as your ticket to the game. Do it well enough that you're not going to create additional risk. Do it well enough that regulators feel you are a good corporate citizen and you are playing the game with them. But if you stop there and think that that's enough, you're going to be in pain. And we've seen this over and over again. You can't comply your way to high performance. You also can't comply your way to resilience. The domain shifts. So think about it. As we start looking at that compliance framework, we do the things we have to do. Then we want space for the things that break or the things that don't work well or the gaps, because none of us are perfect. We'll miss stuff. That's where the world of resilience comes in. If you can think of critical risk management, and I'd urge you, think of the 10 risks that will kill your business or force your business to be successful. If you can't solve decision-making, reporting, data and information around those 10 things, why are you trying to do it for 50 or 100? Get the critical 10 working, and then you can scale and expand. That's when, after those 10, we need enough resilience. We need to go, if something happens that wasn't on the list, how do we deal with it? Well, we need to be able to deal with incident management. We need to be able to deal with emergency management. We need to be able to deal with crisis management. We need to have a reputational risk structure in place. All of that forms part of resilience. But I want you thinking a bit deeper than that. It's about individual resilience too. We seem to forget that organizations are really just collections of people. And if our individuals are not resilient, what makes us think our organization will be? Right? So we've got to be really careful about the way we do that. You don't build resilient people by telling them they have to be resilient. You actually build resilient people by stretching them continuously in a well-structured process that doesn't break them to build capability to weather disruption. The scientific term for that is actually stress inoculation. Okay, we can inoculate you to stress over time, but it takes time and it takes stress exposure. So if you're, and I'm sure some of you must have oversight or function of your safety division, If your safety division is so focused on trying to wrap people in cotton wool and make sure they're never exposed to anything bad, your business can't perform. Conversely, there is a line, and we've learned the hard way, that many safety risks are manageable. And we get the best outcomes just picking safety by leveraging System 1 and System 2, by having great process safety, but also switching our people on to get good outcomes. We don't want to rely on one or the other. When you get the compliance and resilience pieces working, we can then get into the world of presilience, where that idea of proactive prevention. So if we've got those 10 critical risks that could kill us or help us, how do we make sure that the good parts of those manifest, but the bad parts don't? Okay, so that's the first part of presilience. And the second part is things change. The world changes. You will get disrupted. Right? Can we learn to find opportunity in disruption? That's a skill set you can train for. You can build for it. Okay, think about it. Who comes out of disruption stronger? Those who are looking for the opportunity or those who are just hanging on to survive? Okay, so it's an interesting piece for us to consider. So realistically, compliance, the stuff you have to do. Resilience, the stuff we need when the stuff we have to do is not enough or something unexpected happens. Presilience, proactive prevention, and opportunity centrism in practice. If we get all three working, we get a high performance. So I've had great results running board workshops on appetite and tolerance, where I try and get the board to help me with how much do they want to put into compliance, resilience, and presilience. Because if they don't want to put anything into compliance and they only want to be innovative, you have to get them to realize there's compliance risk now. You know, people could go to jail, people could die. If they want to focus only on ticking the box, but not innovating, then likely they'll get disrupted. Somebody who's not as constrained will find a better way to do it and disrupt them. So it is a balancing act. Often new startups are very much on the Presilience side because they're looking at everything as an opportunity and they've got nothing to lose. Organizations older than 30 years tend to sit on the compliance side a little more. And so we've got a bit of work to do to balance this out. Practically, and this is a firmly held belief for me because I've seen it and I've done it in my own business. If we can shift a bit of our thinking out of compliance, out of resilience into presilience, innovation improves, engagement improves, and performance improves. It does. We shouldn't do that at the risk of creating more vulnerability. But if we are stuck being reactive, if we are stuck waiting to be told what to do, right? Who's driving your ship? Who's driving your game? You're not. You're reacting, not proacting. It was exactly that reason when we started with Presilience. Originally, we went proactive resilience. And the more we used it in our consulting business, the more we found resilience, respond, react, recover. Phonetically, it's too hard for people to actually change their mindset. My Arabic is terrible, so I wouldn't even try and address those terms in Arabic. But it is important that we understand what is conjured by people when we use words, as opposed to what we think is conjured, or what we think their belief might be versus what their belief actually is. And you ask any of my psychology of risk students, and they'll know that the thing I say all the time is the challenge we have is that perception is reality to the perceiver. And if we can't manage perception, we can't manage risk. And we need to get good at that component. That means we have to get good at understanding culture. I'm cognizant I've only got about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to move a little quicker. You can pick up this book if you want. The research comes out of University of Southern California, Dave Logan, John King. They did a 10-year study looking at performance. This is a performance study. And what was so cool about their study is they broke it down into really two criteria: the language people use and the behaviors they exhibit. Originally, they thought the top of the food chain was 4. If we get strong tribal pride, where our organization is based on people who believe in what we do, trust what we do, and value us, we get great high performance. Because interestingly enough, their research showed that for every leap up this ladder you get, you gain roughly 50 to 100% productivity. I want you to think about that for a little bit. In their research, which is pre-COVID, this is pretty scary. This is US-based research, obviously, but about 75%, if we just look at those two, 75% of organizations were made up of people who felt they were apathetic victims or they were the lone warriors. So no team-based performance, no integration. It's just either my life sucks or get out of my way because I'm great. Those are the primary drivers. No surprise, high performance is not really something that comes out of that. If you can shift that to stable tribal pride, where people who work for your organization, your division, or your business believe in it, believe in you, and believe in themselves, you could almost double your productivity. Think about that. That's like doubling your workforce. Okay, so risk is not just about, hey, can we plug in a framework here to make sure people report on better decisions and show us when they stuffed up their decisions. It's a way to create sustained high performance through the way we think and act. And I would say risk culture is the game, not part of the game. And the more we can get to the point of that sustainable tribal pride, the easier it is and the nicer it is to run your business and the more future ready you are. We have to have an ethical overlay for this. Humans are strange, right? If there's nothing in it for you, you might do it for the greater good, but it won't be sustainable because eventually you'll get frustrated and you won't want to keep going. Okay? And equally, if you're not having your needs met, remember the Maslow's hierarchy, you can't keep doing it. So practically, I believe we should be asking some questions of ourselves. If we have to make a decision, is it good for me? Is it good for you? Is it good for us? And is it good for the greater good? If you tick all 4 boxes after you've run your bias check, because it's easy to find bias to justify that, you don't need risk management, just do it. But I'd say almost guaranteed in a VUCAD world, somebody's going to be unhappy or somebody's going to misinterpret your information or your findings. That's where this field of risk management really comes into play. And that's where our skill set becomes so valuable in trying to make sure that stakeholders who won't get all their needs met understand why we've done it this way and why it is a risk managed methodology. We can have incredible cut through that way. And guess what? When you have an ethical underpinning, it's really hard for people to come after you and blame you for wrong decisions or blame you for not doing the right thing. So we can move away from that CYA mentality into a high performance mentality. There's lots of tools that help with that. This tool is a very simple tool. Allegedly, the late President Eisenhower had this on his desk. I don't know, I wasn't there at the time. But just think about how you, your team and your organization divide up what's important and what's urgent. It's not always done based on an aligned methodology of what the strategic and tactical drivers are. So just that tool alone can be very, very useful. Think about the role you play. If your title is manager, then probably you are more of a coach, player, coach or referee. If your title is advisor, you are probably squarely a coach. If it's audit and assurance, you're a referee. If you're the risk manager, you are the player. You're the one doing the job. Okay? So you want to urge yourself to understand what job it is. And sometimes we just watch. You're the spectator. So here's the challenge. And if I could see your hands, I'd ask the question and look at you, but think about it. Forget your title. I can guarantee you, if you view yourself as a high-performing person, and if you've logged onto this webinar, you clearly do want to keep growing, then chances are you have to do all of these things. You have to switch between being a player, a coach, a referee, and a spectator. If you want to be successful, you have to be able to do different roles, even though they might not be in your job description. The challenge we've got is not your ability alone, because you might be able to do it. And particularly those of you who are pretty experienced have probably learned you have to do it. You can't talk to everybody the same way. You can't handle the same leaders the same way, etc. The challenge we've got is how to train other people to accept that. Because most of the time they will chunk you. It's a psychological term. They'll put you in a box. And if your title is auditor, you are now in the referee box. They won't accept you being a coach because you're the auditor. You're the one judging them. If your title is risk manager, they will think you have to do the risk management for them, not advise them on it. So swapping roles to be a coach can be quite hard. So this takes a bit of practice. We've got to build these skills. And I mentioned them earlier. We don't really have time to go through each of them, but these are what I feel are the core skills. And if you've built them, risk intelligence tends to manifest quite easily. We also have built a little model to understand how to develop that tactical capability, And if you look at these 2 different pieces, okay, so we can do this really quickly. If you feel stronger tactically, that means you're probably more of a player and most of your experience has had you doing stuff. If you feel stronger strategically, that means you've probably been more of a coach referee. It doesn't matter. There's no judgment. What we want you to do is build both skill sets. You want to be able to do both. You will always be stronger at one than the other. That's fine. That makes you human. But it does take quite a bit of practice to be able to do both and know when to switch between them. Worth the hassle, worth the effort, because it makes you an invaluable contributor to organizational performance. Don't forget, it's not easy. If you look at the bottom one, that's just 14 people, 91 lines of communication to keep everyone informed. It's hard, right? So we shouldn't fall into the trap of going, hey, no problem, I just apply the methodology and I'm a rock star. There is a lot of work to this. We've built a model on a page which summarizes how to apply Presilience in practice. We teach a graduate certificate and graduate diploma which teaches people how to apply the model. But as a quick summary for you, right, to get high performance, we need corporate linkage, which is the overarching rainbow that links process and people. But in the middle, ultimately, every decision should be looking at, do we do something or don't we? That's really where we should be. And if we decide not to, it should be mindful in action, not freezing, because freezing means you're not in control of the situation. We want to learn how to use insight, hindsight, and foresight to gather information, data, and manage biases. We want to make sure that we apply situational awareness, tactical mindset, so two-tiered thinking at least, and hopefully more as we get better. And we need to build critical thinking, comm skills, and decision-making capabilities, as you saw before. We then can start to look at the people side of it, which is around training, influence, and leadership components. And that happens at the self, others, and organizational level. And it's all based on some principles that are critically important. If we don't have purpose, it doesn't fit. If it's not good for me, I'm probably not going to keep doing it. And if it's not good for you, you won't do it. And if it's not good for us, the organization won't do it. So that's where the whole of person and WIFM comes in. The tribal leadership piece is understanding how groups form so we can structure that correctly. Digital enablement and integration. If you're not using tech and you're not using generative AI, you're just hurting yourself now. Like we've moved far enough that we should be using these things to get high reliability and high performance. I have a book coming out on this stuff. It's going to be released on the 1st of April. This link does work. So if you want to click on it, you can jump onto Amplifier's page. I've written the book first on the personal view because I want you to get it, and then you can relate it to the organization. If you're interested in learning more, right, I believe my colleague Dave is actually on this call, but that's his email address. Dave is my head of training and consulting. We do run quick and effective tactical skills programs. The graduate certificate takes about 7 months. Same with the graduate diploma. We actually just had our graduate diploma mapped in the US, and it came out with 24 out of 30 credits to a master's degree. So almost a full master's degree in the US for much cheaper. We tend to get a global audience with these, but equally, if you're interested, feel free to have a chat with Dave. We do like running specific custom-built ones for these, and there's a whole bunch of pieces that come with it. You can see I'm spending a bit more time on the training. I want people to have the knowledge. We can't do this for everybody. We need you to learn how to do it for yourselves. And if we're not doing that, we're going to find this next decade very hard because we're constantly playing catch up and getting disrupted as opposed to being able to get ahead of the curve. So to close off, I fondly appreciate your time and thank you for the opportunity to share some of these ideas and thoughts with you. There's a lot more here, but this gives you a bit of a taste. What we want to do is take your risk management to the next level. We want you to force multiply your ability to get your organization's outcomes and have a great career. And equally, we want you to have a great and happy life making things better. And if we can get all of those things happening, hopefully we get a slightly better outcome for the world we're in, because it's pretty messy right now. And I think if we work together, we've got a better chance of better outcomes. Thank you. And I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes if there are questions. Over to you, Fayadh. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Gav, for this informative session. I think the members now, they need time to digest all of this valuable information. So we truly appreciate this opportunity. So if someone has a question, they can raise their hand and I can allow them to open the mic and speak. Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. By the way, Dr. Gav, your lecture is great, and you said a lot of important information. And you have experience in this field. I want to ask you, what are the key lessons learned from risk management in a global organization that can be applied in the again?
Arish, that's a huge question, and we could spend 4 hours talking about that. But I think there are a few things that have stood out to me when you see good. I can tell you with confidence, probably working in about 20 countries, I don't think I've ever seen perfect in terms of the
Okay,
way
it's enough
organizations
for me.
manage risk.
Yes,
But
please.
the ones that do it well and the ones that enable risk to not just be a division within the organization, but actually the enabler, or there's a few things. One, they're usually headed by somebody that's pretty passionate, well-spoken, and understands business and the corporate drivers. That's the same in business too. I'm sorry, in government too. You need to intricately understand what that, whether if it's the government department, what are they trying to do? And once you understand that, so you're not just doing risk management, you're enabling them to succeed, then risk management starts to become this embedded thing. I think one of the mistakes we often have is this idea that people do risk management as a separate thing, as opposed to this is just part of the way we do business. Risk management is part of life. Every time we make a decision, okay, we're basing that on likelihood of success, likelihood of probability, likelihood of consequence, etc. So risk happens everywhere all the time. One of the next best things I found is that that person within the organization gets the ear of the CEO or the most senior person who loves this stuff. So your job is to convince the most senior person that this is the way forward and that there's huge benefits for them. And then this becomes a living part of the organization. People don't just report when an incident happens because they have to. They know that if I share information, it might go to a risk team that will analyze that information and help us figure out how to not have it happen again, or give us some lessons learned out of it. So they value what you do. And lastly, the critical piece is it is digitally enabled and fit for purpose. It has the right pieces in there that make sense. So with that in mind, some of the worst ones I've seen have been in financial institutions that are older than 50 years, because some of them have got 100, 200 years of history, and they've built up these risk processes over time. Nobody even knows why they use some of the stuff they use anymore, what works, what doesn't work. But they're so stuck in compliance and they don't know which levers get pulled to do what, that they're too scared to take stuff away. So we're in a fascinating stage of risk evolution. And I honestly think it doesn't matter where you are placed globally. We are in a global ecosystem. We're in a global supply chain structure. And we need to be thinking about first our own backyards, but then can we be the exemplar? And with that mindset, generally you see good high performance. Having had roughly 300 grads through the Psych Risk program, that's the previous university program I ran, many of them have done incredible things. And I look at some of these people, I'm like, well done. I'd love to take credit, but it wasn't. I taught them skills and they applied them incredibly well. You are the next generation that has to do that. I hope we can give you the knowledge and skills to be successful at that. Happy to take one more question.
Thank you very much. One more question. Let's see.
We've given too much information.
Very valuable information. Thank you very much, Dr. Gav, for this session. So I think no more question. Thank you very much, Dr. Gav, for this opportunity. We truly appreciate this opportunity. It's so valuable information. You gave us another angle to think about risk management. So we will stay connected.
I look forward, and please do connect on LinkedIn, stay in touch. We share lots of information and keep doing what you're doing, which is making things better. Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much.